So what does this guilty verdict mean? Not just for the future of the Republican Party, but for the future of our democracy, if a convicted felon can run for president and do so with the backing of one of our two major political parties. For more on this, I'm joined by Doug Jones, the former Democratic senator from Alabama. He also served as the United States attorney for the Northern District of Alabama. Joe Walsh is a former Republican congressman from Illinois. He's the host of the podcast White Flag with Joe Walsh. Good morning to both of you gentlemen. Thank you for being with us. Senator Jones, good to see you. Let's start with you. Mitch McConnell said the charges against Donald Trump should never have been brought in the first place. Two of your former colleagues who are contenders to replace McConnell in Senate leadership have come to Trump's defense, even though they've sort of tried distancing themselves from January 6th. Senator John Cornyn called the verdict a disgrace. Senator John Thune called the case politically motivated. You've worked with all of these people. Does any of this surprise you?
Yes, it absolutely does, with a number of them. Some, not so much. Some you would absolutely expect. But I keep hearing the word shame and disgrace. Well, the shame and disgrace, Ali, is the comments coming from Republican leaders throughout this country. This was a jury that convicted Donald Trump. It was not a Justice Department. It was not a DA. It was a jury in New York that convicted him. And the fact of the matter is, they're the ones that are tending to create what they describe as a banana republic. To basically compare our justice system, to continue to attack this justice system is really breaking the framework of our Constitution. And I don't know if they fully recognize that or not, but it is a real travesty of what's going on.
Right, because you're a lawyer and you understand that some people don't like verdicts and judgments and there are methods to deal with that. But this is Joe Walsh. This is something entirely different. This is the complete undermining of the system, which, by the way, I was just talking to the senator about what's going on in the Senate. It's worse in the House. Speaker Johnson saying the Supreme Court should get involved in this. Jim Jordan calling on Alvin Bragg to testify before his weaponization of government committee. What do you make of this?
And Ali, it's consistent, though, right? Look what Donald Trump has done. He has absolutely destroyed the faith in our elections system in the last 3 to 4 years. Most Republican voters now no longer have faith in our election system. And Doug Jones is right. Now he's doing the same exact thing with our justice system. Ali, this may sound funny, but Donald Trump's the luckiest guy in the world. I mean, think about it. 3.5 years ago, he tried to overthrow an American election. He won't be put on trial for that before this election. He used the powers of his office to force Georgia to overturn their election results. He won't be put on trial for that before this election. He stole classified documents and then obstructed the search and retrieval of those documents, and he won't be put on trial for that before this election. Instead, he's been convicted for paying hush money to a porn star he had sex with 15 years ago. It's given Mitch McConnell and Susan Collins and all of these Republicans who don't like Trump, this case, Ali, has given them a real easy excuse to say this conviction is bull.
Senator, there are a lot of close races in this country, and when we showed that polling about 67% of people saying this won't change their mind, I think we should just provide some context there. For most people, they've made up their decisions anyway. But take a look at these numbers. 15% say they're more likely to vote for Donald Trump. 17% say they're less likely to vote for him. To the extent that the real verdict is going to come out on November 5th when people make their electoral decisions, is there anything to be done about this? Like, is there anybody to be convinced? Because it seems that people are largely unmoved by this.
We've got a long way to go. I mean, we've got conventions, we've got a debate, we've got sentencing that's got to come up. We've got a long, long way to go before November. And remember, what you're looking at there is a national poll. The real key is in those battleground states. And 2 or 3% is going to make a difference in those battleground states. Yes, unfortunately, I think so many people are made up. We are that tribal these days where people are going to vote for or against a team. And you're not going to move them. They're not going to be moved at all. But there is a swath of Americans that I believe can be persuaded and can be moved. And just a few percentage points will make a difference in these swing states. And I think that's clearly going to decide the election. And I think the campaigns, Trump's going to have to deal with that. He is really going to have to deal with it because it's not just the conviction. It's the underlying facts that people often have to remember. Paying hush money to a porn star and then lying about it, falsifying records. And if you start connecting the dots with all the other lies he makes, I believe it's going to make a difference in that swath of people right now that will ultimately make the difference in the election.
Joe, you and I have talked for years on this stuff, and you know, one of the interesting things about you, and you were a congressman, is that there were a lot of lines you would cross, you and your colleagues would cross that we didn't think people would cross. What is the line for Republicans? What line will they not cross with Donald Trump? What's the exit ramp that they have to take? Because I hear your point. This wasn't it. What is it?
And by the way, Ali, that's a really important point. This wasn't it. My great fear is not just with Trump's base. This ruling with almost every Republican and sadly, I think a lot of independents, they think this indictment was unfair. They think this indictment was a stretch. But to answer your question, there is no line. Again, Ali, I know I'm a broken record. For the first time in American history, a president in 2020 lost an election and refused to concede. And then he tried to overthrow the election. I mean, a healthy political party, Ali, would have picked up Donald Trump and thrown him to Siberia, never to be heard from again. My former party is fully radicalized. There is no line. There's nothing Donald Trump can do to peel most Republican voters off of him.
So Senator Jones, people have been asking and been talking on radio shows and call-in shows and saying things like, is this going to be the excuse for Republicans to do whatever it is they're going to do? And clearly the answer is no. Republicans aren't going to do anything to Donald Trump. The lineup of the Red Tie Brigade was kind of fascinating. Is there something to be done with the 100 million people who didn't vote in the last election? Is there something to be said about the fact that there are a bunch of people who you can put this question to say, you may have a convicted felon who is about to become the president of the United States, and to your point, connect the dots. If he lied about this, what else is he lying about?
Absolutely, Annie. I think you really nailed it with that question. We are looking at a situation where we did have more people voting in 2020, but we're still in so many states record lows. I mean, there are still 50% of the people that don't vote, or 40% of the people that don't vote. Even in high states, it's 25 or 30%. I think Democrats across the board, not just in blue states, but certainly in these red states and these swing states, have to really start identifying the low propensity voters, the non-voters, and go after them to say, you have got to get out. This is your duty. You can save America. You can save democracy. And I think it's a very powerful message that needs to be developed from one end of this country to the other. As a pro-democracy, we need to be sounding the warnings that our divisions within this country are what is the biggest threat to democracy. We can talk about Donald Trump, but it's these divisions, and these non-voters and low propensity voters have that ability to change that.
And Joe, you lean into that. I mean, that's your point, really, of the things you do. You get into conversations with a bunch of people. It's not really, I mean, in some ways it's about Donald Trump, but I think the senator's right. We're very divided people, so we have to make a decision and a hot take on what we think of everything based on partisan politics. It doesn't have to be that way.
Absolutely. And look, Ali, Trump doesn't have anything to prove. Every American knows who he is. And America needs to decide, do I want this ugly, horrible human being back in the White House? Ali, this is up to Joe Biden. I do believe there are a lot of undecided voters right now who do not want to vote for that, I'll watch my language, that guy. But they need to be convinced that Joe Biden is up to the job, that he can seal the deal. I think this is a great opportunity for Biden to show the American people, I'm not too old, I'm up to the job, and to really take Trump on real strong. I think if he can do that, he can close this deal.